Good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you. We're looking forward to spending an hour together, having a conversation and sharing some information about our most recent survey of public opinion. Before we get started, I'll give you a little bit of housekeeping about how we're going to go through things today. I'm going to be starting out by presenting a good chunk of our public trust and confidence information through some slides that we have. And those slides are in the app, so everything that you see appears in the app. We also have hard copy versions that look like this, and they're on the back table there by the water. So on your way out, if you want to take a hard copy, you can pick up one of these. We are going to try to keep this flowing and interactive. Our goal here is not just to tell you what we found, but to get your feedback on it and to gather some information from you. And so to that end, as we're going through this, Molly is actually going to be jumping in at a couple of points, and we're going to do some real-time polling here in the room using a little bit of our own extra technology. We'll get to that part a little bit later on. Questions and answers. This polling information always generates lots of questions as we go. I'm going to encourage you to jump in at the point in the conversation where your question is relevant. Please just raise your hand, and I think that Judy or Ellen is going to have a microphone to bring over to you so that folks who are online can hear your question. For the people who are watching online, you can add your questions into the chat box for this session, and our hosts are going to be keeping an eye on that, and then they will channel your questions back to Molly and to myself. So that's the plan for the next hour or so, and let's get started right out of the gate by talking a bit about how we do our survey and how we don't do our survey, because this is always a popular topic to understand the basis of it. So this is essentially a survey of national public opinion, and I'll get into some of the nuts and bolts in a second. We construct this survey using input from an advisory committee that we put together, and on the screen right now you're getting a look at the members of the community who participated in building our survey questionnaire. So we bring them together. We have a couple of meetings. We talk about kind of what the hot issues are in our community and what they want us to be asking people. And then once we gather that input from these folks, we take it to a professional public opinion research firm. And they're the ones who actually build the survey. So they operationalize the kind of concepts that we come up with, put it into a form, which is an actual survey questionnaire. How do we do this research? It's a combination of telephone and online surveys. This particular poll was conducted in October of last year, between the 12th and the 16th. And I'll sort of, stop there for a second and ask you to think about kind of where we were in October of last year. So this was a survey that was done fairly far along into the pandemic. A lot of the impact has already been felt. It's kind of in the middle of the Delta wave, but well before the most recent Omicron wave. The firm that we retained to do this work is called GBAO Strategies. They've been working with us for over 10 years now. They've done surveys, they've done focus group work, really great professionals, and it is their job to take our kind of issues and operationalize them and to sort of figure out how to ask questions in a way that are professional and rigorous and not slanted. And we then find 1,000 registered voters who are going to respond to our survey. Those 1,000 people come from across the entire country, meaning it is a 1,000-person sample that is representative of demographics across the country. So it's about 52% female, 48% male. It's representative in other demographic ways as well, in terms of race and in terms of geography. One important geographic note about how we do this survey, because we often get asked, can I have the data for my state? Well, I mean, you can, but for the most part, it's not going to be very useful to you because this is 1,000 people across the entire country. So if you're in a state like Rhode Island, you might have 5 people in the 1,000-person sample. And if you're in a state like California, you might have 250 or 300 people. So relative to the size of the country, we pull out that number of people from each state. So the short answer is generally no, the state level information isn't really rigorous or scientific. It is at the highest national level, and that's kind of what we're trying to get at here. Margin of error, 3%, 19 times out of 20. So what that basically means in plain English is that if we were to conduct this survey 20 times over those sets of dates with any sample of 1,000 registered voters in the United States, that 19 times out of those 20 times we conduct the survey, the numbers that we get back will be within 3 percentage points of the numbers you're seeing today. And that is a very high degree of scientific certainty, and it's what makes us feel very good about the information that we share, that it's on point and that it's accurate because of that relatively low percentage in the margin of error. Are there any questions to this point on the methodology and how we do this work? I want to make sure people feel confident and comfortable in the numbers they're going to see. And this is a great place to stop and see if people have questions about how we do it. It's not a survey of court users. It's important to keep that in mind. This is a survey of people's opinions. Opinions are valid. They may not be factually accurate. They may not have an entire base of knowledge that we might like them to have. But these are people's opinions, right? That's the world that we're living in. Greg.
I just wonder, it's always tough with the registered voter thing if you've ever been a thought of trying to reach out to non-registered voters.
Yeah, it's definitely something we look at every year that we do this, and it may be something that we look at changing in the future. Registered voters are sort of an easily accessible sample, and that's part of the reason that we do it, is that it's a reliable and accessible group. Any other questions on methodology? If not, then I think we're going to try and launch into the first set of findings that are on public trust and confidence. We have a set of key findings. I think in the interest of time, I'm going to skip past this slide. It's a quick summary of what's in what you're about to see, but I'm going to jump forward here and talk about the first figure. So a big reason that we do this survey work is to understand what is the trajectory, what is the trend in overall public opinion towards the courts? Is it going up? Is it going down? How are we doing, right? It's to some degree is kind of the horse race question. And we've been asking this same question every year for, I think, the 9 or 10 years that we've been doing this survey. And we've got kind of a set of questions that we ask exactly the same way every year so that we can compare and benchmark from year to year. So the first key question that we want to know about is, how much confidence do you have in each of these institutions? And the results from the most recent survey indicate that a couple of things. First, they indicate that people have more confidence in courts than they do in what I'll call the political branches of government. And this is a consistent finding year over year, that typically people have a little more faith in the judiciary than they do in either the legislative or executive branches of government. However, it is the lowest that we've seen this number in the many, many years that we've been doing this work. Our high point on this question came back in 2018 when 76% of our respondents told us that they had confidence in the state court system. So that's a pretty significant change, down 12 points in 3 years. A question I think that I've been asked the most about this is, should we be really concerned about this? And I think that the answer is both yes and no. I'll start with the no part first. The pollster tells us, look, confidence has been going down in all branches, in all institutions of American life for, 30 or 40 years. This has been a fairly steady trend going in the wrong direction. So to a certain extent, we're sort of being swept along with these broader changes, whether it's, with these other branches of government. It's a loss of faith in the academic world, in media, in corporate institutions. This is part of a broader trend in American society, and we're sort of continuing to see it play out. So that's a cause for concern, but it's not necessarily a specific cause for concern about the work of the courts. In other words, they're not really being treated any differently in the public perception than in these other institutions are. So that's the no part. Maybe it's not that big a deal relative to these other changes. The yes part really comes in on this next figure, which is where I said we definitely need to be concerned about what's happening, because Americans are concerned about the ability of the courts to deliver on one of the core promises that we're supposed to be delivering on: equal justice for all. And now let me show you what's been happening on this particular measure. But recall what I said at the outset. Our goal here partially is to measure things over time. So here's how people have been telling us they feel on this question for the last number of years. You can see this trend line going very much in the wrong direction. That in 2014, we had 62% of our respondents say that equal justice for all was a term that described the state courts either well or very well. And you can see a steady downward momentum on that question down to our 2021 survey, when for the first time since we've been asking this question, more people told us that it does not describe the courts well than it does. We are now at a 1% hole here after many years of being on the right side of this question. So, why is this? This, of course, why is the big question that we would all like to have answered. This survey is not going to tell us specifically why. We're going to talk about some of the things that have been going on that could be kind of driving this change over time as we go through the session. But this is very much, I think, a cause for concern for all of us in the room. This is not where we want to be. We want to be in a considerably different spot. Any questions? Again, I'll encourage you to raise your hands as we go. Even if I'm, yammering on, feel free to raise your hand and I'll be glad to bring you in. Okay, we'll proceed. So one of the interesting pieces of information we pulled out of this year's survey was to look at how many Americans told us from this 1,000 registered voters sample, how many of them told us that they have had some sort of direct interaction with the courts. And we look at this in a big picture way. In other words, is this something that have they had an experience in their personal life at some point in the past? And it's kind of interesting to see what people are telling us for ways that they're interacting with the courts. You can see that the most, probably no surprise, the most interaction that most people report is some sort of parking or traffic ticket. A lot of folks, about a quarter, have been party to a family case in their own life. The same number have told us that they've served on a jury. A fewer, 1 in 7, have been party to a lawsuit or involved in a criminal case. But overall, that tells us that when you roll all these things together, from this sample, 63% of everybody we surveyed had at least one of these kinds of interactions with the court system. So we're talking to people who, for the most part, even though we're not pulling directly from court users and sort of asking them about their experience today, going into to talk to the clerk or to deal with the judge or have a hearing, we're talking to people who've had some form of experience and direct interaction with the court system. So moving along from the basic public trust and confidence questions, this year's survey was really focused on the effect of the pandemic on people's perspective of the courts. And so the next set of questions are going to move in that direction. And one of the key findings from this year's survey is that there was a very widespread perception that the pandemic has had an impact on the state court's ability to do their job. So the question that we ask people, and I'll read it because those of you at the back of the room might not be able to see this. To the best of your knowledge, has the coronavirus pandemic impacted the ability of state courts to deliver justice and meet the needs of residents in your state in a fair and timely manner? And we have fully 3/4 of the respondents, 75%, who tell us that from where they sit, they do think it's had either a major impact or a minor impact on the ability to meet the needs of people in their state, which is very telling, right? I think this is informative to us in that people might not have had a direct experience, but there has been enough media coverage and enough people talking to their friends and families about their experiences trying to get things done in the justice system over the last couple of years that people are very aware that there have been challenges and that those challenges have impacted all the way through to customer service. So we're talking to, or we're hearing from a group of people who do feel like, there are challenges and they're aware of them. So I think at this point, we are going to, I'm going to turn the floor over to Molly. I've been up here blathering for the first 15 or so minutes. Molly is going to lead us in a little bit of follow-up. We're going to encourage you to get out your mobile device or your laptop if you have it open. Go to slido.com and enter this code there, and we have a question that we want to hear from you on.
So as everyone accesses the survey online, I'll just go through the question as to what you think is the primary source of information in your own communities that would drive the response as far as the public's view of the impact of the pandemic on the court system. So the options that we have are from personal experiences, from word of mouth, people who share experiences verbally or online with others. Social media is another way people are sharing information, news media reports, and then there may be other ways that you think that people are generating these opinions. So we ask you to vote now, and we'll kind of walk through some of the responses and get some feedback from the group here.
It's interesting, right? It's kind of telling.
All right, it looks like everyone's pretty much had an opportunity to respond here. So with that 45% kind of feedback about social media, which, we all know there's some truths to social media and some non-truths. So, that's something that, how does your court control the message on social media? And is there a way to control that? I'd be interested to kind of get some feedback about that. You see people talk about their personal experiences on social media, good and bad. Oftentimes I know I see things about jury service or people commenting about being called for jury service. So have any of your courts been successful in trying to counter or address some of the kind of conversation that you see on social media about the court system? Or maybe you're here to learn more about how to do that. Any ideas?
Has anybody had a really a horrific experience with social media that they want to share? Or is this just sort of a general sense that that's where people are talking?
And then also about the news media, that's another kind of source of information. Again, I think whether that's through coverage of openings and closures, as well as maybe trial court coverage. Depending on kind of the relationships with the news media in your jurisdictions, do you feel like the news media are giving the courts a fair shake? Do you think there may be some more education that should be shared with reporters? I know kind of as a past journalist, the nature of court coverage has changed quite a bit over time. And, media is strapped to cover lots of different things. And, they write a story and then they have to shoot video and then they have to post something online. So that sometimes affects the quality of the reporting. So have any of you seen kind of the result of that in a positive or negative way in your communities? You have a question?
I don't know if it's anything specific, but 2,000 landlord-tenant cases successfully disposed of does a great deal of social good, but you're not going to report on it. You're going to report on one sensational, political thing or one sensational, murder or something. And it's just the nature of the news. So all of the vast majority of what we do just doesn't get reported on.
Right, right. Here's another comment in the back.
One of the things that we did when the pandemic first broke, which was more than 2 years ago now, with top of the third, was we got ahead of it. We actually posted on our social media the big numbers that the media was pointing, like when we hit 1 million deaths. And so, what we've done is reminded people that use the court, and we do hybrid hearings, is that we're still in a pandemic and we're in it with them. So it's not an us versus them thing. Even our most frequent users and filers get it. They see we're trying. So I think that's what's being spread.
Sure. And I think you bring a very good point as far as using social media to kind of shape the message. And so whether it's, reporting on clearing cases and maybe kind of creating your own news in some ways because the news media isn't able to kind of get to things that they believe are less significant. It does create some opportunities for courts to kind of identify their own ways for getting information out.
Should we move on?
Yes.
All right. So we're going to come back and do a couple more of these before we wrap up, but we will have another slide for you about access to the courthouse, which is a very interesting piece of the takeaway from this year's survey, because I think one of the things that's pretty evident is that getting into the courthouse, I think a lot of us have known it's been a challenge for some time. The pandemic has made it plain that physically being at the courthouse can be an issue for a lot of folks. We asked our respondents to tell us if any of the following issues would be a problem for them personally in terms of physically going to a court to take care of a matter that they needed to be physically present for. And you can take a look at this variety of responses and their sort of staggering numbers. When I first saw the results here, I was taken by two things. First off, the number of people who cited, anything at all. If our goal is 100% access to justice, and we have this number of people telling us that they can't get to the place where justice is being delivered for any of these reasons at all, we've got some work to do to get to that 100%. The one that really stood out to me, I think, was the distance to travel number, with half of our respondents telling us that that they are far enough away from a courthouse that even just getting to that place could be a real challenge for them. And I guess there's a number of ways you can read into this information. It could be that, we know we've got a lot of courthouses that are far flung in our more rural areas. There's no question about that. But I think it's also true that if you live in LA County and you need to get from where you live to the LA Superior Courthouse downtown, that might be 2.5 miles, but that might take an hour and a half for you, right? So there are a variety of ways to read into this information, but half of the people saying that the distance to travel just to get to their courthouse would be a barrier for them. And I think that the childcare number, 22%, I was surprised that it was that low, since we often hear about childcare being an issue. But so we looked at the subsamples, and the number goes up to 40% for individuals who are under the age of 40. In other words, those who are likely to actually have children. So you got to look into the data a little bit to see what's really going on. So the takeaway here is that that people very much see challenges to be able to get to a physical location if that's where that thing has to happen. We're going to go back. Molly's going to do another one of our Slidos. I'm going to go up here and set it up.
All right, getting back to kind of your specific jurisdiction, what would you say are the top 3 barriers that we've identified in this survey, looking at the options as far as childcare, time off work and school, a handicap or disability, the distance to travel to the facility, finding transportation, and then public health concerns?
Don't have quite enough geography or real estate here to get everything on there. But so again, we're asking for your top 3. You can pick multiples of these. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Oh, no. That's my mistake. I set it up wrong.
All right, top 1.
Pick your top 1.
Right. Looks like almost everyone's had an opportunity to respond. As far as addressing the time off from work and school, have any of your courts found a creative way to address that concern, whether that's working with employers or with schools to try to make accommodations, or is this just kind of an ongoing challenge that we still need to kind of do some creative thinking around as far as trying to break down that kind of obstacle or perceived obstacle? Comment in the back.
I think that there might be one option missing. I'm from a really rural area, and one of the hardest things, especially during the pandemic with remote courts, is access to internet, access to service. A lot of people don't have that, and it makes it very difficult for them when the only option for them is to appear by Zoom.
Right, right.
That's an important point. We're going to talk a little bit about the digital divide issues in just a moment. What we were doing with this particular slide was trying to mirror the physical barriers question to go into a physical courthouse.
Oh, there's another comment in the back and one up here as well.
Well, I was just going to say, we did some survey work in connection with the remote hearings, and that was the top response. You saved me from taking off work, driving to all the hours associated with that visit. So that's, I think, a real plus there.
Right, right. Thank you.
The best we've been able to do with the number one time off from work and school is try to be as efficient as we can, make it a one-stop shop, or someone lets us know about some scheduling challenges, try to work around that, but really try to make it a one-time hearing or trial if we can.
Right, right. And would that include maybe narrowing the windows of a typical kind of hearing time from like an afternoon to maybe several hours? Are you able to kind of pinpoint it that closely?
No, we have calendars running all day.
Okay.
So if we know someone has a scheduling problem ahead of time, we're able to accommodate them. But even if they just stand up during their calendar announcements and give the court some insight, then we can accommodate them.
Right.
Or even with continuous, if someone's in school or something. Now we have hybrid. But of course, in our jurisdiction, which is Georgia, you can have trials, but it has to be with consent. And these are non-jury matters.
Sure.
It has to be consent of both parties. And a lot of times they just don't know how to reach out to each other ahead of court to get that consent.
Right, right. Thank you. Any other comment?
Well, with respect to the time off work, I know back when we had courts, before COVID, when everyone appeared in person for simple things like traffic court, our judges would always ask at the beginning of the docket, does anyone have any time constraints? Does anyone need to go first and why? And so they would try and accommodate those people as best as possible.
No, that's great. And sometimes it just takes a simple question like that to make sure people are accommodated. There's a question. There's a comment up front.
1 second, John.
The Chief Justice mentioned two. The Chief Justice mentioned two that I think are very significant. One is after work hours and how hard it is to get us to work at times other than our scheduled time. And then having asynchronous processes so that you don't have to appear at the same time to present two sides of an argument.
Right, right. Does anyone have night court or court on the weekends outside of first appearances, maybe?
We have night court.
Okay, great. Anyone else have night court? Right, great. Thank you. Oh, sure.
Even before COVID, I think one of the difficulties with many jurisdictions having night court is you have to have the court security in place. And that is a struggle with law enforcement. A lot of being a revolving door in many instances, they struggle to keep the court secure even during the daytime. It's been one of the issues we faced when we were trying to get night court on a consistent, regular schedule.
Right.
What we found worked was tapping into the school resource officers that would be done at 4:00 and then could come and work those night shifts.
Interesting. There's a comment up here and I think another one in the front.
They moved.
Oh. Was there another comment up front? No? All right, great. Thank you. Great feedback.
Okay, so we'll move on to a few more findings here, and we're going to jump into the digital divide issue that's been raised next, because we did ask quite a bit about this in our survey. And the findings that we have now found, or the findings that we've landed on the last couple of years as we've asked these questions, is that for the most part, Americans are telling us that they do have the tools that they need to participate remotely. Obviously, it's not everybody, but the surveys of the last 2 years have looked a lot like this. This is the numbers that we're finding when we ask sort of key questions about do people have the technology tools they need to participate. So 88% of the respondents told us that they subscribe to internet in their home, and 95% told us that they own a cell phone. Okay, and so when you look at the percentage of the sample that tells us that they have neither internet service at home nor a cell phone, you're at 1% of the sample. So it's a very, very small number. Now, the pollsters, always kind of caution us here, right? They say you're using technology to talk to people, to ask them questions about technology. So you're probably not getting the people who don't have it. That's an important caveat, right? But that said, it does appear that for most people, they're going to have the tools that they would need to participate in remote hearings or do other kind of remote participation in activities, and that's pretty important. I think you especially have to kind of layer that against the information that we just looked at in terms of barriers to physical access to the courts. And if people have these tools, then they can participate in things remotely that they're telling us, a slide ago, are actually really significant barriers they may not be able to get past. We talk a lot about we want to get to 100% access to justice, and there's been a lot of criticism around setting up systems that really only allow people who have access to digital or electronic tools to participate. I think we also have to keep in mind that a couple of years ago we were in a much worse place overall, and that the people who are telling us they can't get to the courthouse, those numbers are considerably higher than the people who are telling us they don't have the tools they need to participate remotely. So there's lots of sides to this. I just would encourage everybody to think about the whole context of these numbers and kind of what they mean. Okay, this is our last of these. Before we do it, let's
Sure.
have John jump in with his question. Judy, do you mind coming up here so that we can get John a microphone?
Roger Smith, who's a prominent researcher in the UK, suggests that we not use the term digital divide because it brings up the image of a chasm.
Mm.
He suggests we talk about digital gradient, a slope.
Mm.
And so some people have the highest degree of connectivity. Some have lower down that slope, but it's not like it's just haves and have-nots. And if you define it that way, then our challenge is how to set up our technology so that it is usable by more people down the gradient.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. That's an interesting
That's a good construct for us to think about. Okay, let me get to the last of these.
One last question. We have a couple different solutions or suggestions as to how to address the digital divide or digital gradient. And how would you rank these solutions that we've shared here? So they range from public kiosks or terminals at the courthouse, possibly looking at off-site locations that are centrally located within your community, prepaid cell phones or data cards, or distributing tablets for remote jury service.
We've lost our percentages here.
Oh,
I
no.
don't know what happened.
Oh, okay. All right, looks like most folks have already responded. So looking at the response for the kiosks and the terminals at offsite locations, is anyone here actually doing that in their communities or have partners to be able to offer that service? Or is it something maybe being investigated at this moment? Okay, great. Do you have it in place already, or is it something you're looking at?
So in Michigan, we are doing an e-file project and creating our own e-filing information. So all of our libraries actually have that access already and have for about 3 to 4 years. So that has been a huge relief and allowed us to stay open during the entire pandemic.
Great.
To process that paperwork. So that is already started, but we're also looking, just got a grant for kiosks around the county to be able to take like cash and things of that nature for them to pay their criminal costs and things of that nature, as well as Zoom into hearings. So we're looking at that right now, but we do have terminals in our libraries for the e-filing.
Great, thank you. That's another comment there.
The ones on off-site locations, I would have concerns about the security of that. And I wonder if anybody's doing it. Are they limiting the types of events that people can join for that? For instance, a DV situation, I can't imagine you'd want to do that. So I just wonder if anybody's doing it successfully, and if they are, how are they overcoming that particular obstacle?
Anyone?
Anybody want to comment on security issues?
That's a really interesting question, because we offered it to libraries, a shopping mall. Let's see, there was one other facility, and they all turned us down because they didn't want the security risk of agitated people coming into their facilities.
Mm-hmm. All right, and then also looking kind of at that same concept with kiosks and terminals at the courthouse, is that something commonly in place within your jurisdictions? There's still some kind of work to do, or maybe looking at kind of annex locations as far as service centers kind of outside of the main courthouse in your community? To the courthouse, right. Right, right.
Hi. I think it's an awesome idea to have the kiosks in the courthouse. We currently have an ombudsman's office. The challenge we come into is that sometimes people they don't understand the process. And so they feel more comfortable and confident in doing it properly if they have someone to speak with. And we don't always have those resources. So even though you have a computer available for them and you have staff there, if your resources are limited, one person can't handle the volume that a particular court may have. So I still believe that it's a good idea.
Sure. Thank you. Got a couple more comments.
I'm a little bit confused about how this is actually a solution to the digital gradient in terms of having kiosks in the courthouse so that you're able to electronically access the court hearing, but you're already at the courthouse. So you've already had to deal with the problem of maybe living a great distance away from the courthouse and finding some means of getting there. I mean, that's the same problem we've got before the digital issue coming up.
So I think it's really for those who may not have that at their home, taking one step out of the process. But you're right, it still presents another access concern.
I'm from Denver, and we currently do it, but only for payments. So we have a kiosk in the probation offices where defendants can make payments at the probation office. We also have a kiosk in the courthouse, so they can either do that on their own or maybe wait in line and then pay one of the clerks. But so only for payments at this time.
Okay, great. I think there was,
You're absolutely right. It doesn't solve the issue of getting to the courthouse. Well, these are mandatory in New Jersey, and every single Superior Court courthouse to have these. And sometimes everybody on the event is going to be virtual, including the judge and the court clerk and everybody. So the only way to join it is to join virtually. So the only way this person could do it, they got to get to the courthouse, but at least we got a room for them to be part of the hearing. So it solves that issue. We've also used it successfully for virtual visits with probation officers or pretrial service officers, because again, they don't have the access to the technology, and it's at least a way for them to do it. And again, that officer could be anywhere, usually at home. So it's been very useful. We have 4 in my courthouse. I'd say any given day, we're at least using 3 of them on a fairly continuous basis. It doesn't solve everything, but it does solve a few problems.
Great, thank you. Judy, I think there's a comment along the wall here, and then there's another one in the back. Just getting exercise today.
Just to expand on Peter's point, we do have such a room set up in our courthouse, but it's mainly there for people that didn't understand correctly that the hearings were going to be virtual, and they thought it was going to be in person, and they show up at the courthouse minutes before the proceeding, and at least they then have a chance to participate. But we do have all of our commissioner-led proceedings done virtually now, and people are joining those from home or work on their personal devices.
Great.
So we did something very similar. We created what we called a Zoom room for individuals who don't have the ability to log in from home. They still have to come to the courthouse, but we have also found that our library did not want individuals at their facility doing their court hearings. The other thing that we ended up doing is we had our Wi-Fi expanded from our building, because we were finding that people were driving to the courthouse just to use our free Wi-Fi for their hearing from the car. So we made sure we boosted that up so that we could have more individuals out in our parking lot who didn't want to come in to use the Zoom room for the court hearing.
Interesting.
We're also a little bit different. We have 5 courthouses in like our area that people can travel to too. So they don't have to come just to the location of which their hearing would take place. They can go to any one of those areas which might be closer to them and use that way of getting into the courthouse. So whether it be our e-filing kiosk or payment kiosk, they're allowed to go to any one of those areas as well. And like I said, we're looking at the other Zoom rooms too for that information.
I don't think we talk enough about this, but that point you made about the libraries turning us down, to give you an idea of what an uphill battle it is, we have law libraries in every courthouse in South Dakota. And we thought, well, that's really not a good use of courthouse space, and it's inconvenient for the public. We're only open 8 to 5. They have to come through security. It's a pain in the neck. So let's at least offload the law library terminals and the public access terminals that we'd otherwise put in the courthouse. We can use the space for something else. The public has a lot more access, rah, rah. None of the libraries wanted anything to do with us because, frankly, they find court stuff intimidating and scary and potentially risky. Mm-hmm. And so, so I don't know what we do with that, how we address those third-party public facilities and allay their apprehensions about that.
Mm-hmm.
Not that the law libraries were unwilling to serve people with their legal proceedings. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Judy is getting her steps in today.
It's not, in our minds, since we work with attorneys all the time, they've all gone to law school and they sit there in Westlaw and they research case precedent. That's not how we found the public libraries looked at it. The public libraries looked at it that, we have little kids reading hours in the evenings. We don't want a sex offender to come in, sit at that terminal and try to figure out, okay, how do I get out of this restrictive environment that I'm legally stuck in? The scenarios like that, they found really scary.
Sure.
Okay, this has been a great conversation. I want to make sure that we have enough time to get through the last couple of slides here, which are going to focus on what people told us about participating in these kinds of remote and video proceedings. Important data here. So we're gonna press along unless there are any other comments. My takeaway from this conversation is that there are a million challenges and a million solutions, and there are issues with all the solutions just as there are issues with the challenges. So let's talk a bit about what people told us about their comfort levels with participating in remote proceedings. And our survey tells us that 2/3 of Americans feel that they are comfortable using video technology in ways that they might have done something in person in the past. So we asked them, how comfortable do you feel using video conferencing services for meetings or appointments typically held in person? This is outside of the court context, right? This is the general question in the last 2 years, or think about your entire life. Where are you with your comfort level doing things online now through video that you might have done in person in the past? So 66% overall telling us that they're comfortable. About 38% of those saying they're very comfortable, 20% saying somewhat. A little comfortable at 14%, 20% not at all comfortable. You won't be surprised to know that as you analyze the responses to this question, a lot of this is driven by age and by people's, the younger you are, the more likely you are to feel comfortable or very comfortable with these things. And the older you are, well, the converse, right? So that's an important takeaway from this year's findings generally. There are big differences on attitudes in these questions based on demographics and in particular based on age. We then wanted to ask people if they did have to do some sort of court proceeding virtually, how would they feel, how comfortable would they feel with a particular service, doing it virtually versus in person? Here's what they told us. We gave them 4 options of things that they might be able to do virtually, or if we made it available to do it virtually, would they do it or would they not do it? Reporting for jury duty and doing basic jury screening, 60% said that they would definitely embrace that as an option. Arbitration mediation online by virtual, by video, 55, 35 wouldn't use it. Appear remotely for your own case. 52% said they would actually use this as an option in their own case. And I think that's an important distinction in the data. We're talking about asking somebody for a situation that involves them, not the abstract, but for you. If you could do this for your own case, for something that affects you, would you do it? And we've got a majority of people telling us that they would. And then serve on a jury, 49%. So close to a majority, but not quite, saying that they'd be open to it. So, not a lot of surprise in this information, I don't think. The idea that you might go down to a courthouse, get called for jury service, a lot of people know what that experience can be like, where you can wait for several hours and then be dismissed at the end. They don't necessarily love that potential use of their time. And so saying that you can do it online and where maybe it takes them 15 minutes or 30 minutes, definitely much more appealing than not. I do want to point out that we asked similar questions a year ago, and in the appear remotely for your own case question, we actually saw the number go down this year from the last time that we asked this question, 64% to 33%. And I think that that is explainable by the fact that we were really in the heart of the pandemic when we asked this question in 2020. And so most people, 64%, told us then that they were enthusiastic about the idea of not having to go into a public space like a courthouse. Now, the findings also show us that depending on the sort of case that you're talking about, the type of case, they have different degrees of disposition to participating remotely. We did some work on this in the same survey a couple of years ago, and we asked people about online dispute resolution at that time. We weren't asking them about video hearings or video participation, but about ODR. What we did find is that there's a lot of consistency from the findings a couple of years ago as you move it forward to 2021. So if you're part of a court proceeding of this type, would you prefer to handle this type of case remotely by video or phone, or by appearing in person at the courthouse? And you can see that when you're dealing with really the most kind of personally impactful issues around things like family matters like child custody or divorce, majority of people are telling us they still want the ability to access justice in the courthouse rather than doing those things virtually. But as you move down the chain to what I'll describe as kind of lower stakes, more garden variety types of issues, the numbers change pretty radically, especially when you get down to handling something like a traffic ticket, where 2/3 of people are saying that it's actually their preference to be able to handle this remotely as opposed to going in person. Any questions or reactions to this? Yeah, we got one question or comment right here. Thank you, Judy.
I think one of the challenges for us, and I could be alone here, but it's been that we might have multiple defendants or the majority of defendants that are fine with remote hearings. It's bringing our judges along to get comfortable with remote hearings and trials, and attorneys are not fans, in my area, are not fans of remote trials at all. So you wind up with this insane backlog, and our judges are not on board with virtual, and neither is our county government. So it's a big struggle there. So there's a huge piece of the puzzle missing.
Does anyone have any suggestions or creative strategies that your jurisdictions have used to kind of win some of these?
And let's be careful, we only have 5 minutes left. I don't want an hour therapy session about this issue because I know it could easily become that. Jeff, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of it comes down to the time commitment of the style of case. Mm-hmm. And people got Zoom fatigue and don't want to sit on a jury trial for hours, where handling a traffic ticket, they can be done in 20, 30, 40 minutes, whatever. So I think those, you see a higher percentage because they don't want to commit themselves to hours. If it's going to be a longer time period, then I'll have to do that in person.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a good observation. Thank you. Okay, we've got, I think there's one more hand up here. Judy, do you mind walking up here? We're going to do one more comment, and then we're going to get to our final slide, which is our payoff pitch, our takeaway.
I was just going to say that this shows that hybrid is the way to go, because that's a fair number of people, 35% that would deal with it. So, I mean, it's not statistically greater, but it sure shows that people are willing to do that, and I think that could be effective.
Right.
Okay, great. All right, final slide for this morning, which is the sort of the big picture question that we want to leave you with, which is that we ask people at the end of the day to make a choice between a couple of statements, and this in polling is called a forced choice question, right? Where you're given two options. You're not given any gray area. You have to pick one of these options or the other. And so people are forced into one camp or the other based on which opinion is closest to their own if they had to pick one. So statement one, the one in purple, is basically once the pandemic is over, courts should continue to hold hearings by video. That's the short part of it, right? Statement two, the oppositional perspective, is that courts should stop holding hearings by video as soon as possible, because of technology issues, digital divide, what have you. So here's what people told us overall. We get a slim majority who tell us that they're on the side of statement one. Keep doing it. But you got 38% saying stop it right away. So it's not what I would describe as a clear-cut supermajority by any means. There are definitely divisions, and those divisions surface when you take a look at some of the demographics. Those who are under 50, 62% on statement one, 29% on statement two. Over 65, the numbers basically flip, right? 54% say, stop this right away. Let me get back to business as usual. 34% saying, keep doing what you're doing. So as I said earlier in this presentation, age is really a major driver in people's perceptions about whether they're going to be willing to engage in kind of remote participation, and it really bears out in this question, this final question about should we keep doing it or should we not keep doing it? So that is our final slide. I think we're almost done. We're at the bottom of our hour, I think, right, Judy?
Yes, we are. I want to thank you. Thank you both for presenting on behalf of NACM. We really appreciate it. It was very relevant and important information for all of us to take back to our jurisdiction. So thank them.
And thank you for your engagement and the conversation. And it sounds like we've made some progress. There's still some work to be done, looking at hybrid hearings, challenges with security, and all of that. So I hope you all have a great rest of your conference.
Yeah, we're going to stay on this, obviously stay on this issue from the public opinion perspective, and hopefully have conversations like this at future NACM meetings.